Can you imagine standing at your own wedding, absolutely radiant, only to watch your brand new sister-in-law, Jessica, smugly poison your champagne? Yeah, well, I did. But what she didn't know was that her perfect, malicious little plan was about to blow up in her face in the most explosively humiliating way possible, all thanks to one simple switch. I was barely 5 feet away, hidden behind this ridiculously oversized floral arrangement of white hydrangeas, when I saw her. Jessica, my husband Mark's sister. She was hovering over the sweetheart table, eyes darting around like a trapped bird, making sure no one was watching. And then, satisfied, she picked up my champagne flute. My heart slammed against my ribs. I watched, frozen, as she swirled the glass, a tiny packet of powder dissolving into the expensive vintage Dom Perignon. Then she placed it back down right at my seat, next to the place card that read, Mrs. Sarah Bennett. She smoothed her emerald bridesmaid dress, and that smirk, that chilling, triumphant smirk, spread across her face as she walked away. My blood ran cold. I knew Jessica hated me. For 3 long years, she'd made it her personal mission to remind me that I was just a shopkeeper's daughter, marrying into the illustrious Bennett dynasty, an old-money American family who treated their lineage like a sacred text. But this wasn't just another snide comment about my off-the-rack shoes, or a passive-aggressive jab at my parents' tax bracket. This was physical. This was pure, unadulterated sabotage. I walked towards the table. The reception was in full swing, 300 guests mingling under a silk tent in the Hamptons. The air hung heavy with the scent of lobster and designer perfume. My husband, Mark, was across the room, laughing, completely oblivious, with his college buddies. I looked at the 2 champagne glasses. Mine, now spiked with God knows what, and hers, sitting innocently at the maid of honor seat right next to mine. I didn't think. Not for a second. I didn't hesitate. There was no time for moral high grounds or second-guessing. My hands trembled, just barely, as I reached out and switched them. 10 minutes later, the DJ lowered the music. A hush fell over the crowd as Jessica tapped a spoon against her glass, the one that had been meant for me. She stood up, radiating that effortless, inherited confidence she'd weaponized against me since day one. She raised the flute high. To the happy couple, she announced, her voice dripping with fake honey. And to Sarah, who finally got what she wanted. She took a long, deep sip. A long, deep sip. She drained half the glass. I picked up the glass that was originally hers. I raised it, and I smiled. Because I knew something Jessica didn't. The real wedding drama hadn't even started yet. To understand why I didn't stop her, why I let it all unfold, you have to understand the war zone I'd been living in. The Bennetts aren't just a family, they're a corporation. Mark is the heir to a massive logistics empire, and his mother, Eleanor, runs the family social calendar like a military operation. When Mark first brought me home, Eleanor looked at me like I was a stain on her pristine Persian rug. But Jessica? Oh, Jessica was the pitbull. It started small. When we announced our engagement, she accidentally spilled red wine on my white blouse 5 minutes before family photos. When I chose a venue, she called the manager, pretending to be my assistant, and canceled my reservation, forcing us to scramble for a backup date. She whispered rumors to Mark's friends, implying I was only in it for the money. She tried to break us up a dozen times, but Mark, sweet, blissfully oblivious Mark, always brushed it off. That's just Jess, he'd say with a shrug. She's protective. She'll come around. She didn't come around. She escalated. 2 days before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, I overheard her talking to her mother in the hallway. "Don't worry, Mom," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, but I caught every word. "I have a plan. By the time the toasts are over on Saturday, Sarah will be the laughingstock of New York. Mark won't be able to look at her without being disgusted. The annulment will be signed by Monday." I'd spent the last 48 hours living in a state of sheer paranoia, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd checked my makeup for irritants. I'd checked my shoes for broken glass. But I never, ever expected her to go for the drink, right at the head table, in front of everyone. It was bold. It was desperate. And it meant whatever was in that glass was designed to be instantaneous. Back at the reception, Jessica was still holding the microphone. The plan was for her to give a 5-minute speech about our childhoods. Obviously, she didn't know me in childhood, so she'd prepared a speech entirely about Mark, effectively erasing me from my own wedding narrative. Mark has always been the golden boy, Jessica said, her voice booming over the speakers, radiating smug superiority. He deserves a partner who understands the weight of the Bennett name. Someone who fits. She paused for effect, letting her words hang in the air. I took a sip of my safe champagne. It tasted like victory. Suddenly, Jessica blinked. A confused look crossed her face. She reached up and touched her forehead, her perfectly applied foundation now glistening with a sudden sheen of sweat. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she stammered. "Mark deserves, he deserves." She swayed visibly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor, sitting at the mother's table, frowned, making a subtle gesture for Jessica to wrap it up. But Jessica couldn't wrap it up. Whatever she had put in that drink was hitting her system with the force of a freight train. Her eyes dilated. She gripped the microphone stand so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked at me, confusion warring with a dawning panic. I feel. She mumbled into the mic. Then a giggle bubbled up out of her throat. It wasn't a happy giggle. It was manic.
Whoa.
The room is spinning. Why is the room spinning, Sarah? She said my name with such venom, even in her delirious state, that the guests shifted uncomfortably. "You know," Jessica said, her voice losing its polished mid-Atlantic accent, becoming slurry and raw. "You think you won. You think, because you have the ring, you have the money." She leaned over the table, knocking over a vase. Water spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like a dark omen. "But Mom and I, we have the trust documents." The room went silent. Dead silent. You could literally hear a pin drop on the grass. Mark turned to look at his sister, his brow furrowed. "Jess, what are you talking about?"
Sit down.
"You're not well." "I'm fine," she shrieked, pulling away from Mark's hand. The sudden movement made her stumble back. She clutched her stomach, a grimace of pain twisting her face. It was becoming sickeningly clear. That powder wasn't just a sedative or a hallucinogen. It was a purgative. A violent, instant-onset laxative meant to cause uncontrollable bodily function failure. She had intended for me to soil myself in my white wedding gown, in front of 300 of society's elite. Karma, however, has a wicked sense of humor. Jessica doubled over, still clutching the microphone. The sound of her heavy, panicked breathing amplified through the speakers. I need to go," she gasped. But she didn't move. She couldn't. The paralysis that often accompanies strong sedatives was kicking in, fighting against the urgent, biological need of her digestive system. She was trapped in her own body. "Sarah," she groaned, looking directly at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She knew. In that moment, she realized exactly what had happened. You switched them." Because she was still holding the mic, everyone heard it. "You switched them." Mark looked at me, then back at Jessica. The pieces were clicking into place for him, but not fast enough. Eleanor stood up, her face pale. "Cut the mic," she shouted at the DJ. "Cut it now." But the DJ was too slow. Or maybe, just maybe, he was enjoying the show too much. "I was supposed to ruin you," Jessica screamed, the confession tearing out of her as her control dissolved. "It was just a little powder, just enough to make you soil yourself on the dance floor. Why aren't you sick? Why am I sick?" And then it happened. The biological inevitability. A loud, wet sound echoed through the high-end sound system. The collective gasp of 300 people sucked the air out of the tent. Jessica froze. The back of her emerald dress turned a dark, horrifying shade. The smell hit the front row instantly. She dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening thud of feedback. She stood there trembling, humiliation washing over her in waves, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. It was tragic. It was grotesque. And it was exactly what she had planned for me. Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. He wasn't looking at Jessica anymore. He was looking at his mother, Eleanor. Because Jessica had said, "Mom and I have the trust documents." Eleanor rushed to the stage, trying to cover Jessica with a shawl, signaling for the security team. They dragged a sobbing, soiled Jessica off the stage and towards the portable luxury restrooms. But the damage was done. The image was burned into everyone's retinas. The video phones that had been recording the speeches were now capturing the fall of the Bennett princess. I sat perfectly still. I didn't smile anymore. I put on a mask of concern. The beautiful, empathetic sister-in-law. I stood up and walked over to Mark. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "She said she tried to drug you," Mark whispered, his voice shaking. "I saw her put something in my glass, Mark," I said softly, grabbing his hand. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe it was just a sugar or a medicine, so I just swapped them to be safe. I never thought she would actually poison me. Mark looked at the empty glass at Jessica's seat. Then he looked at his mother, who was frantically ordering the wedding planner to get the band playing again. The reception, needless to say, was over. People were polite. They stayed for a bit, but the appetite was gone. The smell lingered. The gossip was already flying through WhatsApp groups and social circles. But the real explosion happened an hour later in the bridal suite. I was changing out of my dress, my pristine, unsoiled white dress, when Mark stormed in. He wasn't alone. He dragged Eleanor in with him. Jessica, I heard, was in her hotel room, sedated by a doctor and rehydrating, refusing to speak to anyone. "Tell me it's not true," Mark demanded, cornering his mother. "Tell me you didn't know Jessica was planning to drug my wife at our wedding." Eleanor, usually the ice queen herself, looked rattled. She smoothed her skirt. "Mark, don't be dramatic. It was a prank. Jessica has a crude sense of humor. It went wrong." "A prank?" Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "She admitted it on a hot mic. And she mentioned the trust documents." "What about the trust documents, Mother?" Eleanor went silent. Her eyes flickered to me. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't just some passive girl she could bulldoze. I was the one standing there, clean and composed, while her daughter was the disaster. "The trust," I said, stepping forward, my voice calm but firm. "The one that unlocks when Mark turns 30 or gets married, which is today." Mark turned to me, bewildered. "What do you know?" "I know that your grandmother left a specific clause," I said. "I had done my homework. I had hired a private investigator 3 months ago when the bullying started getting severe. I needed to know what I was up against. If Mark marries before 30, he gets full control of the Bennett family holdings. If he doesn't, or if the marriage is annulled within 6 months due to scandalous behavior or incompatibility, the control remains with the trustee. You, Eleanor." Mark turned back to his mother, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Is that what this was? You wanted her to humiliate herself so publicly that I'd be forced to annul the marriage to save face? You wanted to keep control of the company." Eleanor pursed her lips. "You aren't ready to lead, Mark. And she pointed a shaking finger at me, is a gold digger. We were protecting you." "Protecting me?" Mark laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You just had your daughter poison my wife. You realized that if Sarah hadn't switched those glasses, that would be her right now, destroyed, humiliated." "It wouldn't have killed her," Eleanor scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Just encouraged an exit." Mark went quiet. He walked over to the desk in the suite where the marriage license was sitting, signed by the officiant, but not yet mailed. Eleanor watched him, holding her breath. She thought he was going to rip it up. Instead, Mark picked up his phone. He dialed the family lawyer. "Hello, Arthur." "Yes, it's Mark. I'm with Mother. We need to schedule a meeting for Monday morning regarding the transition of the trustee powers." "Yes, effective immediately. And Arthur, draft a restraining order against Jessica. If she comes within 500 feet of Sarah or me, I'm pressing charges for attempted assault and poisoning." Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Try me, Mark said.
His voice was ice.
He was no longer the boy they could manipulate. He opened the door. Get out. Eleanor left. She didn't look back. She looked smaller, older. When the door clicked shut, the adrenaline finally left me. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the edge of the bed. Mark sat next to me, putting his head in his hands. I am so sorry, he said, his voice muffled. I didn't believe you. All those times you said she was mean, I didn't want to see it. It's okay, I said, putting a hand on his back. No, he looked up, his eyes filled with a raw pain. It's not okay. You saved yourself. You shouldn't have had to. We didn't go back to the party. We ordered room service, burgers and fries, and ate them on the floor of the bridal suite, still in our wedding clothes. But here's the part that I never told Mark. The part that keeps me up at night sometimes, wondering if I'm just as bad as they are. When I saw Jessica drop the powder in the glass, I knew exactly what it was. Not because I'm a chemist, but because I had seen the packet in her purse earlier in the bridal room when she was touching up her lipstick. It was a chaotic, illegal diuretic and laxative mix you buy on the dark web for cleanses. I knew it was dangerous. I knew it would hurt her. I could have just poured the glass out. I could have accidentally knocked it over. I could have told Mark right then and there. But I didn't. I wanted her to drink it. I wanted her to feel the pain she wanted to inflict on me. I wanted the world to see the ugly, messy truth underneath her perfect, polished exterior. When I switched those glasses, it wasn't just self-defense. It was an execution. The next morning, the video of Jessica's speech had 1 million views. The caption was #weddingfail. She became a meme. The pooping bridesmaid. She fled to Paris to stay with an aunt, deleting all her social media. Eleanor was forced into early retirement from the board of the charity organizations she loved so much. The scandal of her involvement in the poisoning plot was simply too much for high society to ignore. Mark took over the company. We bought a house, not in the Hamptons, but far away in California. We are happy. We have a dog. We are expecting our first child. But every year on our anniversary, we open a bottle of Dom Perignon. Mark pours 2 glasses. He toasts to us. To our survival. I drink mine and I smile. But I always watch him pour it. And I always check the bubbles. Because if I learned anything from the Bennetts, it's that you never ever take your eyes off your glass. And you never underestimate the quiet girl sitting at the table. She might just be waiting for you to make a toast. So, tell me, knowing everything I went through leading up to that moment,